Things are pretty messed up from the beginning. A woman named Carol dials 911 and claims that somebody's inside her house. So we go to investigate, searching the place inch by inch, but we find nothing. Usually this is explained away. The mind of an older person living alone, eventually it starts deteriorating. The onset of dementia, other mental issues, they start to take a toll on their lives. It can be quite sad, really. This woman, however, she's only 24. So in other words, the probability of this all being inside her head, it's extremely unlikely. She also seemed to be terribly distraught by the whole situation. Why would she be acting, right? Well, we leave her place. We tell her to contact us if she sees anything again. Couldn't really do anything at that point, right? So we were somewhat surprised when we got another call from her the very next day. We drive down there, we search the house again, we find nothing. Again. Problem is, the house seems different this time. Almost as if there's been some subtle detail that made it a separate place from the one that we were searching yesterday. My partner, Beck, says that he noticed it as well, but he doesn't quite understand what's wrong. So we decide not to say anything about this. We tell Carol that we came up with nothing. However, she tells us to stay. I recorded him, she says. She takes out her phone, tells us to watch the video that she pulls up. There was footage of her in the house. She's running around, she's breathing frantic. And then we see him. A large figure, covered head to toe in what appears to be a black bodysuit. He lumbers toward the camera as Carol screams and ducks into a room, locking it from the inside. It's a few bangs on the door before we can hear footsteps walking away. We don't know how to react to this footage, but we try anyway. We come to the conclusion the man must have left once Carol got behind the door. However, the front door was locked when we came, and Carol told us that she hadn't left the room. Did he also have the keys to her house? And that would explain a lot. But it also made the situation a lot worse. And we decided to keep an eye on our house for the night. We're discreet, parking about a block down the road in an unmarked car. We're both fully awake, ready to go as soon as we see some sketchy shit, Around 2 a.m., we see somebody walking across the road towards her house. However, this isn't the man. It's Carol. It's Carol herself. Beck and I must have had the same look on our faces. What the fuck, So we get out of the car, we make our way over there. We knock hard on the front door. Now nobody answers. We can see lights flickering on and off intermittently. We're not sure what that's supposed to mean. Was she trying to tell us to leave? Get a call from dispatch a few moments later. They're telling us Carol called 911 again. Says there's multiple people in her house. They ask if we need backup. We say yes, right? So without another moment of hesitation, we force the door open and we barge in. Living room lights are still flickering on and off, but we see the light switch. Nobody's touching it. We call out for Carol. Nobody responds. In fact, the place is dead quiet. I can see the neighboring houses starting to turn on their lights from the commotion. We rush up the stairs. We start sweeping each room. There's nothing. Once again, we search the place inch by inch, but there's nothing in here. Not even Carol, who we clearly saw enter a few moments earlier. As I pace around in petrified confusion, Beck speaks up. There's rooms here that shouldn't be. What the hell are you talking about? I ask in response. So I've been counting, he says. There were 9 total the last time we came. There are 10 now. You didn't notice? I forced myself to think hard. Subconsciously, I knew there was something off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. However, I realized. Basement. There was only 1 door down there last time. Beck nods. 2 now. I don't know what to think. I look at my surroundings and try to make an assessment, but there's really none that can be made. We hear a knock on the door about 10 seconds later. It sounds agitated. We look out the living room windows, but we're not met with red and blue lights. We're hesitant to answer, of course. I decide to take a step forward, but Beck pulls me back. He looks at me, shakes his head, whispering, "We left the door open, remember?" He was right. My radio starts crackling, another call from dispatch, telling us that we need to leave the house immediately. Carol called again, saying we were going to die in a deathly monotone voice. The knocking stopped. We could hear footsteps in the basement. Something's in here with us. We decided that was enough. We needed to get the fuck out of there. So as we start descending the stairs, we hear a voice coming from the kitchen. Carol comes out, blocking our path to the door. She looks detached, with blank, beady eyes staring at us. "Did you find him?" she asks without any semblance of emotion in her voice. "I think he might be in the basement. Why don't you go check?" Beck and I are frozen in shock. She just keeps looking at us, gesturing towards the basement door every now and then. The footsteps down there sound like they're running in circles now. We ignore her request. We abruptly brush past her, bolting out the front door. Backup still isn't here, so we decide to just get out into our car. However, we see somebody down the street, peering through our driver's side window. He's large. He appears to be dressed in a black full-body suit. He looks away from the window and directly at us. It's hard to tell from this far, but the suit doesn't seem to have any eye holes. Beck speaks up. "Sir, please back away from the vehicle." His voice cracks in the middle of the sentence. He's terrified. As soon as Beck stops talking, the figure starts running towards us. It's fast. It's too fast. In the time it takes for us to pull up our guns, we've realized it's actually moved past us and into the house. We waste no time running into the car, locking the doors, waiting until backup arrives. When it finally does, we're extensively questioned while what appears to be SWAT searches the house. However, this isn't the police chief asking us. It's some guy in a suit, a guy we'd never seen before. Asks us things like how many doors were in the house? Like, what did Carol look like exactly? Did we ever see a man with one eye wandering around? We answer inconclusively to pretty much all of them. We have no idea what the hell's going on. At one point, we see SWAT members carrying multiple stretchers outside, loading them onto their truck. Not an ambulance, mind you. Their own truck. And eventually, the man who was questioning us tells us to go home. Report to our station as usual. Tells us not to worry about what we've seen here. I don't know how he expects us to do that. We drive back to the station in complete silence. As we park, Beck finally lets out a sigh. Jack's fucking crazy, dude. I look at him in confusion. What are you talking about? Who the hell's Jack? He reciprocates an equal confused stare. The hell are you talking about? The dude who owns the house. What? It was a lady named Carol. How'd you forget that already? We hold each other's chaotic gaze for what feels like a minute, but we say nothing further. We both silently exit the vehicle. We start heading our separate ways home. We both know that something's terribly wrong with the other. I try not to think about it too much as my head hits the pillow and I manage to drift off to sleep. It takes me about 3 hours. Only to be woken up immediately by the telephone, barely coherent. I answer it. "We need you. A woman dialed 911, says that somebody's in her house." My heart sinks slightly. It sinks completely when she tells me the address. It's Carol's. I hang up the phone. I slump into bed. I just want this nightmare to end. It started when we called out to the stars. Into the darkness. We felt so small, tumbling through vast emptiness while clinging to the skin of the world without a single reason why. We were curious, yeah. But ultimately, I think we were just terribly frightened. And we were young. So very young. We were children. And like a lonely, lost child, we did the only thing we could think of to make it stop. We did what we thought we had to do to make the universe make sense. We called for help. For years, we scanned the sky for a sign. We sent signals to the stars in the darkness beyond. Were we alone? But the skies were quiet. Always so quiet. Leaving us to our own makings. But crying children never cease. And neither did we. We sent calls into every corner of space for decade after decade. We refused to believe no one was out there. They had to be. Yet for some unknown reason, they never answered us. Everyone remembers when that changed. They think it responded to the HIDive message from 1974. The response to the HIDive message was received almost 3 months ago, in 2 separate parts. The first part of the message was received at the Hat Creek Radio Observatory in California. The Allen telescope array picked up what sounded like static interference. They continued on for over an hour. It consisted of unintelligible screeching and buzzing sounds that continued without pause for the whole hour. The meaning of this message was never discovered, if it had one. The only thing we knew was that the signal's origin came from somewhere in the Hercules constellation, near Messier 13. As soon as that signal stopped, the real message began. We made contact that day, and we were asked a question. Who is there? It came not through the radios, but as a voice. The voice inside all of our heads, asking the question to all of us. I heard it. My wife heard it. The young heard it, and the old heard it. Even the deaf heard it. Everyone everywhere heard this voice whisper that question in their heads, in every language on earth. I remember it almost too clearly. It asked in that familiar yet indescribable voice that's always there in my mind. It was like one of my own thoughts had gone rogue, had decided to speak directly to me. The world seemed to stop as everyone listened for what came next. Where are you? The heavy question seemed to linger in our minds for hours afterwards, and then for days, then for weeks. That day changed everything. And there were the doubters from the very beginning, the holy ones who claimed that God had spoken to all of us and that the time to repent was now. There were those who claimed that they'd heard nothing, and those who'd claimed that the aliens had given them their own secret messages. And of course, there were those who truly believed that we had been contacted for the first time by an extraterrestrial race like us, one ready to communicate, ready to lead us out of the dark. We were wrong. We never made contact with alien life, at least nothing comprehensible or discernible to human understanding. The stars are vast, and in that vastness our voices had touched the ears of something truly incomprehensible, something hungry and malevolent. The voice. We realized our mistake when the ground started to groan. Beneath our feet, everywhere, the ground seemed to moan. The muffled sounds shook through the dust and the dirt below us. No one knew what was causing it, at least not until the calls started coming in. The graveyards were screaming. All at once the dead had started screaming. Every deceased man, woman, and child had turned in their graves. All the animals did so too. Every dog, every cat, everything that ever had walked this earth. The cries of ancient whales shook the seas, and the shrill screeching of birds echoed in the forests. The caskets shook. The morgues howled. The voices stopped together. In an instant, leaving the world in an amplified silence. In their absence, a new sound filled the air. The voice returned. "I hear you." It came as a whisper from behind. An ominous yet oddly playful presence that felt so close but was truly still so far away. It let us breathe in the silence for a minute before it made us a promise. It was a promise we all knew to be true. "I am coming." The voice was gone, and the air was again filled with screams this time. This time they were from the living. After the voice had gone, we were left to our own devices. Millions panicked, and rightfully so, as chaos took hold of the streets. Many would die in the violence and the gunfire of that night. They would be known as the raptured before long, and the rest of us were the condemned. We could only wait. The screaming dead was only the first of the side effects that we felt as the voice approached. The closer it got, the more we felt it. That first night after the screaming, we noticed the stars bleed. For the first time, a section of the western sky had turned black, blacker than the night. It was only truly visible because of the ring of stars around it. The light from those stars had turned red, and they seemed to bleed across the sky like food coloring dropped into water. Their light swirled and flowed all around the edge of some unseen mass. I knew then that I was staring into the face of the voice. Our scientists claimed that nothing was there, and that their radar and scans always came up empty. Their telescopes could see nothing but darkness in that section of space. However, the proof was right in front of us, as every night that ring of darkness got wider and more stars bled in the sky. We watched it come. As each night passed, the black spot would widen. More stars would distort and bleed around it. During the day, a new hell would greet us. The side effects worsened. The day always brought something new. I'm sure most of what happened will go untold and unknown. The animals started disappearing. All of them. No tracks, traces. No bodies were left behind. Pets would run away. Some violently so. They all retreated, never to be seen again. The forests were left abandoned. The oceans empty. The air was left silent. The world left seemed empty and lonely. They left like water receding from the shore just before the tsunami breaks. One day, about 2 weeks ago, scientists tried to talk to the voice again. They hoped, perhaps, to reason with it. They told it what was happening on our world, asked it questions. The scientists begged. It didn't speak. When asked, "What do you want?" the voice sent a response. The next night, the skies lit up with streaks of fire. It was alight for hours, blazoned with orange and red. We didn't realize the effect until the next day, when the televisions turned to static and the telephones refused to work. We sat watching as the satellites were knocked out of the heavens. After that, reports became rumors and rumblings. Sanity, a thing of the past. The air chilled and weighed us down. The voice was nearly here, and everyone felt it. It rained for a week after the satellites fell. The rain was salty and mired with an unknown filth that turned the grass black. Maybe the satellites tracked something back in with them when they hit the sky. No one knew for sure. All we know is that it fell from clouds, black as charcoal, that blotted out the sun like liquid ash. Darkness fell upon us for days. When the clouds went away, the skies were empty. There were no clouds, yet the sky hung low and gray. If the sun was anywhere in the sky, it never made itself known. Even it had abandoned us. Each day grew slowly darker and darker until night and day became almost the same. Some people would claim later that they'd seen things in the dark. Creatures with gangly limbs, crooked faces, lurking in the corner of their vision. They were tall, white creatures that looked mottled or rotten through their transparent skin. Appearances would last for just a second or two before vanishing without a trace. Some believe this was the first step in the aliens' invasion. But the rest of us, we didn't know what to think. We just knew that it was nothing that simple or benign. They must have been hallucinations, just more madness to endure, but ultimately as harmless as anything else, as harmless as the screams of the dead, the missing animals, and the dying sky. Appearances slowly increased in duration and in number. I think everyone saw them once, at the least. But I don't think a single person would ever guess why they were truly here. They never touched or spoke to anyone. They certainly never harmed anyone. Most who got good looks at them described them as mournful or sorrowful looking. Some even claimed the creatures watched over them at night. And others even claimed that it seemed as if the creatures were sorry for them. One claimed to have seen one prostrate upon the ground, hands clasped above its head. Said it was praying for us. Prayer was no help. The churches and places of worship that had divided us for so long failed to bring hope to any in the end. The voice let them pray and beg for a while, but just days ago the voice ended it all. No one questioned how, for at this point nothing that happened surprised anyone anymore, but on the final days, all books of worship burned. Every last Bible, every last Quran, everything. People rushed to their centers of faith, but found no solace. The churches, the temples, they suffered the same fates, if not worse. People were left abandoned by their greatest hopes. There were rumors of churches all over the world with walls formed from the bodies of those who sought refuge. They were merged into the walls, stuck to them like flies in a trap. They died, still pleading for hope, but they were beyond God's help. The rest of us had learned to stop begging. We waited. The final message came. From beyond the sky it fell upon us. The voice echoed and it spoke the simple truth. I am here. There is a darkness beyond the horizon, the likes of which I doubt has ever been seen. It brings with it the screams of countless souls, and it moves fast. The stars are dying now, and I know they'll never be seen again. The light is dying so fast. I leave this not as a warning, though it's far too late for that. Instead, consider this the last realization, the last humanity will ever know. For we used to wonder whether or not we're alone and lost, but never whether or not we were safe and hidden. The universe is infinite, and our understanding was significantly more finite. We should never have beckoned into the darkness. Instead, we should have clung to the light and closed our eyes every time we turned to the void. As the final minutes approach, I hold one final truth to be certain. I now know why the skies were always so quiet. My life had recently been plagued by a persistent bout of rotten luck. I'd been traumatized from my last job. The weeks spent unemployed were slipping into months, despite the stacks of applications I'd filled out, and every credit card I possessed had been maxed out to its limit. Bitterness, self-loathing, poisoned every fiber of my being, left me with an inescapable melancholy that I was starting to believe was incurable. My latest humiliation had been to dig through my wallet for spare change as a cashier fixed me with a plastered-on smile. An impatient line grew behind me, only to find out that I still didn't have enough money to purchase a meager amount of groceries. I headed to Woodharrel Park afterwards. It was a local, secluded, sleepy stretch of land to clear my head. The park was empty when I arrived, leaving me free to wander the paths alone and aimlessly. Hunger gnawed away to me like a familiar enemy I could never quite shake. In a final indignity, the previously sunny sky suddenly began to pour rain. I, of course, was not carrying an umbrella. I was so absorbed in my own misery, I barely felt the gentle tug on my jacket sleeve. Looking back, I wish I had kept walking along the park path without so much as glancing downward. I wish I had ignored the soft, silent plea for my attention. I wish I hadn't made the horrible mistake of believing that a hand with a touch so timid and helpless was incapable of holding the power to be terrifying. But instead, I foolishly stopped in my tracks. And ever since that fateful decision, I've not had a single moment of peace. I looked down to see the two children standing at my side and immediately felt a jolt of unpleasant surprise. So both stood no higher than my waist, one slightly taller than the other, and both were clad in black raincoats that looked more suited for a sepia-toned photograph than a modern-day child. They each wore matching wide-brim hats that drooped atop their small heads and obscured most of their faces, though I could vaguely discern that the taller of the pair was a boy and the shortest a girl. I was unable to see any features above the pallid faces of their swollen cheeks. Their lips were so colorless that it appeared as if they had little more than a white sliver for a mouth. The children's bodies were round without any of the cherub softness associated with youth. Rather, they looked unnaturally bulbous and bloated to the point of near grotesqueness. Unbrushed tufts of stringy hair jutted from beneath their hats like tangled straw, dry as a brittle bone, seemingly untouched by so much as a single drop of rain. "Hello," I said, forcing myself to sound upbeat. They stared at me in silence. The girl continued to cling to my sleeve. "You okay?" I asked. By now I was drenched and eager to head back to my car. "Do you need some help?" But the pair remained mute. I stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to do, when the girl suddenly began to grip my arm with a startling strength that made me worry she'd pull me to the ground. Alarms rang loudly through my brain. I felt an immediate urge to extract myself from her unsettling grip and leave them both behind in the rain. Well, I wearily pulled my arm away, somewhat embarrassed for being afraid of how the pair would react. If you don't need anything, I guess I'll be on my way. She released her hold on me without protest. Neither said a word as I walked away. When I turned around for a final look of parting, I saw that they were still staring at me, though I could only see their eyes. I felt their gaze follow me with an intensity that disturbed me no matter how much distance I put between us. I didn't look back again. I picked up my pace, I dug my keys out of my pocket. The rain fell as cold as ever. I unlocked my car and was thinking about the can of chicken noodle soup I left in my sparse pantry, but I noticed the girl had left behind a stain on my sleeve. As dark as ink and shaped like her tiny little fingers. I wiped at it with my thumb, but the mark didn't budge. I sighed and I looked up to nearly stumble backwards in shock when I saw the backseat door open and the girl sitting inside. She removed her hat and was holding it in her hands, both of which were clean despite the mark on my jacket, with her head bowed and her knotted hair concealing her face like a curtain. "Hey!" I tried to keep my tone from betraying how unnerved I was, and failed spectacularly. "What are you doing in here?" She sat as wordlessly as before, tightly squeezing and twisting the brim of her hat with such violence that I was certain she was going to rip it apart. I swallowed my uneasiness. "Look," I said as calmly as I could manage. "If there's something wrong, I can't help you if you don't tell me what it is." I reached into my pocket, and I pulled out my phone. "Maybe it's better if I call the police and you can tell them..." My voice trailed off as I watched my phone screen flicker on and off, before collapsing into a scramble of pixels and shutting down entirely. I stared agape at my reflection in the black screen as a terrible feeling of dread began to wash over me. When I looked back up, the girl was gone. In her place rested her hat. The hat appeared soaked, every bit as saturated with rain as my own clothes were, but unlike the jacket and jeans that clung to my skin and chilled me to the bone. The hat didn't feel wet when I picked it up with a trembling hand. It was dry to the touch, even as I watched beads of rain drip from its brim and onto the car's upholstery. I realized, with something between the fascination and horror, that the raindrops left behind no traces where they landed, and when I cupped my hand beneath the hat to catch the drops in my palm, I felt nothing but air. Furthermore, the back seat was completely dry. There was no damp footprints, no water spots, nothing at all to indicate that a girl wearing a coat glistening with rain had been sitting there mere seconds ago. I turned to fling the foul thing into the parking lot and gasped out loud when I saw the boy standing just a few feet away. She forgot her hat," I said dimly, my heart thundering madly in my chest. My mind screamed at me to jump into the car, to drive off as fast as I could, never come back to Woodharrow Park again. But it was that same fear that left me rooted to the spot, paralyzed and helpless, even as the boy stepped ever closer towards me. "Stop it!" I wanted to scream, but my tongue felt too thick to form the words. The boy lifted his hat. A burst of darkness erupted in his eyes, blinding me as a hellish symphony assailed my other senses. I could neither see nor move as I felt insects scuttling behind my eyes and scales slithering inside of my skull. The vile taste of putrid water filled my mouth as the deathly scent of rot filled my nostrils. Final breaths rattled in dying throats, drowning bodies thrashing in water as they sank, screams of agony so shrill that they sounded inhuman. I heard them all and many hideous more. I stood frozen in the terrifying darkness as the rain furiously slashed my flesh like cold blades, unable to weep or let out a watery cry for help. And suddenly, I felt someone grab hold of my hand and pull me free from the loathsome trance, just as abruptly as I had been consumed by it. My vision returned and I saw that I was now alone. Even the girl's hat had disappeared. I dove into my car and I sped away from Woodharrow Park. The sky grew clearer with every mile. When I got home, I peeled off my wet clothes and climbed into the shower. I sat there beneath the hot spray, immersing myself in the steam and the warmth. I jumped out the instant it turned cold. I dried off, I crawled into my bed, burying myself beneath the blankets as my mind raced with the nightmare I had endured. I wondered if the children, whoever they were, had somehow been drawn to the despair I'd felt as I walked through the park. Perhaps my hopelessness and my sorrow had served as a miserable beacon, guiding them towards me and leaving me vulnerable to their presence. There was one thing I knew for certain. It was the girl who had rescued me. I'd known it the second I felt her small hand touch me. I realized now she hadn't climbed into the car to frighten me, she only wanted me to stay with her in the park. Tears slid down my cheeks as I thought of her being forced to forever wander Woodharrow with no one but a boy who carried hell beneath his hat to keep her company. Maybe she too had visited the park while bearing a sadness as heavy as my own, only to wind up in prison by it. I slept fitfully. When I awoke the following morning, I discovered that the stain on my coat sleeve had somehow bled onto my arm. I spent 2 hours trying to wash it off, scoring my flesh until it grew angry and raw, but the mark refused to be cleansed away. I sat on the floor of my bathroom, gazing down into the imprint of the girl's fingers on my reddened skin. I felt the horrid chill of Woodharrow's rain creep down my spine. That was last week. The mark still remains on my arm, and at night I toss and I turn, and I vividly dream of the park. I told myself repeatedly I can't go back there, that I was lucky to have made it out alive, maybe not so fortunate again. But I can't stop thinking about the girl. I pity and I fear her in equal measure, and when it rains I look out the window and I wonder if I see her outside waiting for me, clutching her hat, bowing, her tangled head. The thought both saddens and it terrifies me. So I've made a decision, and perhaps I'll live long enough to regret this one too. As soon as I finish posting this, I'm going to grab my car keys and I'm going to drive to Woodharrow Park. I know that I might be walking towards my own doom. I know that the marks on my arm are likely a bad omen. I know that the girl may be every bit as malevolent as the boy. She may be trying to lure me into a trap of her own. I know that there's a strong chance I'll never be able to come back. I'll never be able to tell you what happened, but I can't keep reliving the same nightmare over and over again. In a way, I never truly left Woodharrow. I mean, my mind wanders its paths even as I hide away in my home. I've got to go now. Wish me luck. Because I have a feeling it's gonna rain. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I want to tell you about Quill.dev. It's a writing tool from tonight's author, The Buffed, and I honestly think this is something that many of you aspiring writers will love to be able to use. Quill allows you to no longer get stuck in the endless cycle of editing. So using Quill, you can't edit what you've written until you hit your word goal. Give it a try, there's a link in the description down below. And now, on to tonight's story. I met this girl that I thought was perfect for me. I mean, our relationship moved really quickly, and I started sleeping at her place after about 2 weeks of seeing each other. The first night that we stayed together, she scared me pretty badly. It's one of those things that you just can't shake off easily, you know? I was lying in bed next to her, reading on my phone, when she rolls over. She looks me dead in the eyes. Doesn't say anything. She just looks at me. "Hi," I say to her. "Ask me a question," she responded. I chuckled when she asked me that, thinking it was just a cute exchange, but she reached out and squeezed my arm. I winced. "Hey, that hurts." She didn't let go. Okay. Do you like sleeping together?" I asked. Yeah, she said, rolling back over to go to sleep. It was such a surreal experience, and so random. Obviously, I brought it up the following day with her, but she swore that she didn't remember. I even showed her a small bruise I had on my arm from when she grabbed me. She still didn't remember. And we kind of laughed it off, although I could tell that the bruise had really bothered her. The next time, the same thing happened. Thought she was asleep, then suddenly she rolled over, she starts looking me in the eyes again. Ask me a question, she said. Do I have to? I asked. Yes. She rolled back over. Apparently her logic worked the same way as any of my elementary school teachers. Hey, are you just messing with me? Only one question per night, she said. It sounds benign, but her tone had a sense of finality to it. I was afraid to attempt another question. The next week or so passed by without any terrible incidents. Every night she would roll over and prompt me for a question, and each night I would offer some innocent inquiry just to satisfy her. I'd ask her if she had enjoyed the restaurant or if she was tired, small things like that. Strange as it was, I was happy and didn't see the reason that this strange sleep-talking gimmick should upset me too much. My sleep was taking a pretty big hit, however, and each night I felt like I was slipping farther down into a permanent lack of energy, as if my battery was losing capacity. There was one night in particular where I felt extremely tired. Fell asleep before her. I woke up sometime in the night with her hand gripping my arm, asking me for another question. Not tonight, I said. Get back to sleep. You have to ask a question, she said. Frustrated, I tried to shut her down with an absurd question. Fine. When will I die? After me. She rolled away as I sat up. The way she had said those words, my body immediately broke into a cold sweat. My stomach turned over. What'd you say? I asked angrily. One question. No, not tonight. I grabbed her. I didn't want to hurt her. I was just so frustrated and admittedly pretty scared. I started to shake her. Not tonight. You need to tell me what's going on. Why are you doing this to me? I was yelling loudly at this point. She didn't respond immediately until suddenly she turned and pushed me. My mind almost expected some kind of supernatural strength, but ultimately it was my balance that got me. With my knees tucked under me and sitting on the edge of the bed, there was no way to stop my falling. I tumbled backwards, getting shrimped between the bed and the wall. I stood up, yelling even more, but she'd already turned back over in bed. I finally started grabbing a few pieces of clothing and went out the door. I had been staying with her for a while, and had only been back to my apartment during the day occasionally. I finished the night asleep there, shaking with anger. She called me in the morning asking where I'd gone. I tried to explain to her what had happened, and I think it scared her more than it did me. I pushed you out of bed? She asked. Yeah, right into the wall, I said. This has to stop. I don't really know what it is, but it has to stop. I'm happy with you, but I don't know. I feel like I'm getting chipped away at, even when the nights are peaceful. I'm scared, she said. We decided to sleep apart for that night. I think she wanted us to at least see each other so I could comfort her, but I was mostly thinking of myself. I was extremely relieved to be apart, and I hadn't realized the full extent of the stress that I'd been under. I even went to bed much earlier than usual, settled in for what I hoped would be a questionless night. I woke up. The clock said 3:21 a.m. I wasn't sure why I woke up. I didn't hear anything, all the lights were off. I even flicked on the lamp, but didn't notice anything. I wasn't sure anything had happened at all. I was still mostly asleep, but suddenly felt a little guilty over the whole situation. Maybe I had overreacted, and I worried about how upset I may have made her. I grabbed my phone to send her a text. She had already sent me one. Ask me a question. it said, timestamped at 3:21 a.m. The text had woken me up. I quickly turned off my phone as if that would make any difference. I was in a cold sweat again, fully awake. I barely had time to process what I had just seen before my phone started ringing. It was her. No chance I was going to answer the phone. All of it was starting to feel like a sick joke, and I quickly lost my earlier feeling of guilt. I shut down my phone completely, struggled to go back to sleep. It felt like all I needed was one day and night of rest. 3:52 a.m. A knock on my door woke me up, and I almost pissed myself. I knew it was her, and my fear grew without limits as I walked to the front door and looked out. There she was. Beautiful but ghostly. Somewhere she shouldn't be, standing in the hallway, patiently. I held my head against the door, trying to decide what I should do. I didn't open the door, but I decided to try my luck. "How can I make this stop?" I asked, as loudly as I could. "You can't," she said. I looked back out the peephole and she was gone. I whipped open the door and stepped into the hallway. She was walking toward the elevator, seemingly unaware that I was even behind her. I almost asked her to stay, worried about her traveling in this weird state, but selfishly I let her go. I even had the horrible thought that if something did happen to her, at least that would solve things for me. The next day she asked how the night had gone, and I lied, telling her that everything had been fine. In her own words the night before, I couldn't stop it, but I could at least try to control it or understand it. The next few weeks, I barely slept. I tried so many different questions, none of the answers were exactly comforting. "Why can't I stop it?" She said it was inevitable. "Have you done this to anyone else?" She said no. "Do you want to hurt me?" She said no. "Can you lie?" She said no again. I may have wasted a question. What did I expect her to say? I tried as many things as I could think of, but no questions about the process seemed to gain me any ground. Each night I lost another little piece of myself, and I think there were some weeks I didn't really sleep at all, getting maybe 5 hours total across the whole span. Exhausted one night after weeks of trying, I tried something different, something more specific. "What is the number of days exactly that we'll be in a romantic relationship after today?" 112, she said. The next night, another question. "What is the reason our romantic relationship ends?" "I die," she said. Each night I dug deeper. "What will your cause of death be?" "Starvation." "What will my cause of death be?" "Electrocution." "Where will you die?" "Nearby." "Can I keep you from dying?" "Yes." "So the future can be changed?" "Yes." "How can I stop you from dying?" "Don't kill me." Her words sent me into a lasting panic. I understood what she was telling me, but for all of my exhaustion and despair, I kept trying. I searched for more and more clarification, but her answers always had a way of remaining just a little too vague. 6 more times I had tried to sleep in another place, even once staying in a hotel without telling her which one it would be. She showed up out of thin air, in the middle of the night, knocking on my door. I called a few people looking for solutions. I called doctors, even a psychic, but my heart wasn't truly in the search. My mind had fallen on an idea a while back, and although it filled me with shame. I couldn't get it out of my mind. She tried to help, but there wasn't anything she could do. Our relationship was slowly falling apart during the day, and it was difficult for her to understand the true gravity of the situation. I also refused to share many of the details with her because, well, I knew it would scare her even more. I tried to continue my investigation, but over time I was just looping back around at the same questions, having forgotten many of her responses. I should have written them down, but each night the sleep deprivation piled up and kept me from thinking clearly. At some point, I know I finally tipped the scales towards insanity, and I'm ashamed of what I did next. A sense of clarity came over me once I had accepted it, and I hated myself. But I was almost excited to ask her my next question. Where can I hide your body so that no one finds it? The hatch near your old campsite. I knew exactly where she had mentioned. There was a small area in the woods near my parents' old house, with just enough flat ground for a tent. You would never find it if you didn't know it was there. But a 5-minute walk from the campsite brought you to a hatch, with its doors usually covered in dirt and grass. It opened up into a small cellar. The next day, I surprised my girlfriend with a camping trip. Our relationship had really reached its last leg, and I explained that it would be nice to take a break and get away for a while. We enjoyed our day together, and honestly, I forgot temporarily about the horrible things left to do. She deserves so much better. Night came, and we sat in front of the fire, her head resting on my shoulder as she fought off sleep. She couldn't see me, but I was crying, hoping that she wouldn't fall asleep so I could stay in that moment. I'm sorry, she said, almost asleep. Hey, it's okay. We're gonna figure it out. I sat there with her for a little while longer, hoping that I would change my own mind. I love you, I whispered. Too late. She was asleep. I picked her up out of her chair and carried her off into the woods. I finally found the old hatch and I laid her down on the ground near it. It took a while to finally pry it open, pushing away years of dirt and leaves with my arms and feet. I had a new padlock in my hand that I had brought with us. I lifted her again and I walked down with her into the cellar, placing her down again in the center of the room. I sat down against the far wall of the cellar and somehow I drifted off to sleep. I woke up to her standing in front of me. In that moment, I finally started to think of the person in front of me as someone completely different than the woman I had met. Will she know that I loved her? I asked. Yes, she said. And before she could turn and head back to the campsite, I ran up the stairs and I shut the hatch door behind me, securing them with a padlock. But I stood there for a long time, knowing my girlfriend was just on the other side. Could I really leave her there? The past few months all came back to me all at once. I stood there feeling every ounce of the frustration and the exhaustion that had plagued me throughout our relationship. And then I weighed that against how it felt each time I heard her voice. Even in times of anger, her voice was my favorite. I knew people that spent most of their relationships not even speaking to each other. What was happening to us be so bad? that I would consider harming her. I think I had even had dreams of carrying all this out, leaving her in there, dealing with the guilt as I tried to forget everything that happened. It almost felt as if I really had done it. And by this time, she hadn't been inside for only a few seconds, but instead, days. As quickly as I shut the doors of the hatch, I threw them open again. My girlfriend walked past me, back towards the campsite. Ashamed and exhausted, I collapsed. I wasn't sure how I could face her when she woke up. Going through the motions woke me up more than anything, and I realized how selfish I had been about the whole experience. I mean, who knew the implications of what we were experiencing, the possibilities? I went back to the campsite soon after to find her awake and concerned with where I was. It took a couple of hours and involved a lot of almost incoherent apologies, but I told her everything. I let it all out completely, even what I had planned when we went camping. I didn't know how she would react. I don't think she did either, but ultimately she said she wants to help to try and understand what is happening, what we can do to keep it from causing any more harm. We both know it'll take a long time, but I love her. And I plan to give her everything I have. That was 4 nights ago. She still asks for questions, but something's changed. I don't feel like I'm dealing with this by myself anymore. I have a lot of hope. I mean, things aren't perfect, but I slept really well last night. I'll update everyone where we go from here. When I was in college, I worked for a local hospital, one of the largest in North Georgia area outside of Atlanta. I won't name drop because they probably don't want to be mentioned, but this hospital was huge. I'd worked clerical jobs in a few other hospitals. You could have easily fit 3 of my previous facilities into this place. That being said, it was a mismatched monstrosity of old and new. The new medical promenade might have been a modern architectural marvel, but areas like the ER and the admin hallway still looked much like they did in 1972. It's a place at war with itself, constantly changing, but also constantly staying the same. Probably why there's so many ghost stories connected to the place. Working at the front ER desk, I came in for a lot of rumors, especially since I worked the night shift. Security has an office in the ER since it's where the biggest train wrecks usually happen. This meant that Carl, the night watchman, would usually wander over to hang out and watch YouTube videos when I'm not checking in on people. David, the late shift maintenance guy, and Mark, the 11 to 7 switchboard operator, are also pretty likely to come hang out if the night's slow and they're on break. Between the 3 of them, I've heard all the good stories from all hours. Some of them are kind of funny, like the nurses Carl walked in on screwing during a security check, or the handsome ER surgeon, Dr. Logan, who cried to Mark for 3 hours while he was stuck in an elevator that had stopped working. I mean, these stories were fun, but they inevitably led to stories about the hospitals, the haunted areas, and the weird occurrences they sometimes witnessed. Some of them are clearly bullshit, like David telling me that his ladder had disappeared from the 44th stairwell and appeared on the roof. But some of them were too weird to be pure fiction. And certain areas of the hospital were definitely more active than others. Places like the South Promenade, where a girl had jumped to her death from the 4th floor railing. David claims to this day that he watched a shadowy figure drop to the tiles a few times. And the look on his face makes me believe he probably wasn't lying. Then there's the matter of Mark's phantom phone calls every night. Mark claims he gets at least 4 phone calls from the courtesy phone on the 3rd floor, every night, between midnight and 4 a.m. Caller never says anything, but Mark's sure he could hear a little whisper under all the static. One night, he recorded the noises on his cell phone to let a friend listen to it who's into paranormal stuff. and when his friend had processed it through a computer program, the caller said, "Jackie and baby in love," but the rest had been gibberish. It happened at the same wee hours of the morning every day. Mark had even sent Carl up to the phone a few occasions to check for people playing jokes on him. Carl had reported the phone wasn't even plugged in, yet the phone calls still came. Then, of course, there was Shaky Leg Mary. Many members of the hospital had seen the entity known as Shaky Leg Mary. She's been seen in the ambulance bay in the ER, in the pass-through hallways where she was wheeled into surgery. Most often, she was seen wandering the OR hallways after hours. She had been a headless woman that had been run over in front of Mary of Mercy one night long before I was hired. Her skull had been crushed, her lungs mostly collapsed, and her left leg was a tangled mess of bones and flesh. They had rushed her to the ER as quickly as they could, but she died on the table as they tried to operate on her. She had made frequent appearances after that. So when Carl came staggering up an hour ago looking starry and pale, I knew he had seen something. I figured he'd had another situation with a combative patient, but it turned out to be a little worse than that. "I saw her," he whispered, like he was afraid to say it out loud. I looked up from my YouTube video and I clicked pause after one look at him. "Saw who?" I asked. "Mary," he said. "Shaky Leg Mary. I saw her in the surgery hallway." I told him to tell me the story, and he shakily obliged. Carl had been doing his rounds, as he usually did, when he saw her. He had come through the surgical center, checking doors and making sure everything was secured. It was 3 a.m. and he was making his way briskly about his appointed route, so he could stop by the cafeteria and get a cup of coffee before heading upstairs to continue. All he had to do was cut through the surgical OR hallway, check the operating room's doors, and he'd come out next to the cafeteria. He had opened the door, and that's when he had seen her. She'd been standing in the hallway, her back to Carl, and he had pulled out his flashlight to shine it at her. He was just about to yell at her, tell her that this area was restricted, when he finally noticed her leg. It was twisted up like a bent signpost, and he watched as it flexed weirdly beneath her. Her hair was dark and oozed with something pink and viscous. Carl swore he could hear her breathing, ragged. Her air hitched in oddly as her deflated lungs tried to pump it. The bulb popped when he dropped his flashlight. The sound made her turn, and her squashed face looked like a ruined jack-o'-lantern as the bulbous eyes stared blindly in his direction. "She was as far from here as that water fountain," he told me, pointing to a fountain that was about 30 feet away. "But that leg didn't stop her from coming after me." Carl said she hunkered down onto all fours like a dog and charged him grotesquely. Carl backpedaled, trying to run, but tripped over his feet and had fallen onto his rump at the least opportune time. She was gasping and closing in on him, jaw opening weirdly in a mouth that was mostly broken, when Carl thought to close the door between the two of them. He kicked out shakily and slammed the heavy door shut. Just as she was about to jump on him, she hit it like a cannonball and then screamed like an angry wildcat. As he sprawled there, panting in the lighted hallway, he heard her slamming into the front door 6 or 7 times before he found his feet and ran somewhere he knew there would be people. That's what had brought him to me. Carl later got David to agree to go with him to make sure that it hadn't been some homeless person who had wandered in and was trashing the place. The two of them turned all the lights on and explored every OR room and the storage closet. But they didn't find anything but surgical equipment and cobwebs. She had disappeared as quickly as she had arrived. But they did bring me to that door to show me one thing she left behind before I left for the night. David showed me a heavy indent on the OR side of the door. one that had left a deep mark in the metal there. "Door's a bit bent, too," he said. "So I'll have to fix the track on it before the week's out." Though, he was emphatic about the fact that he wouldn't fix it after dark. Carl never went to the Aura hallway again after hours. And the legend of Shaky Leg Mary continues to grow. Alaska was a place I had been fascinated with since I was young. My parents were watching a movie and my eyes got so big when I saw the northern lights. I think it's even my first memory. Those shimmering blue and green lights that seemed extraterrestrial. Apparently I would shout, "Twinkle, twinkle," at my parents until they put the movie on. I can never remember what the movie was. Back home, the roof of my childhood bedroom was painted to replicate the northern lights above me. Dad had even taped green and blue fairy lights into the ceiling for me to act as night lights. Maybe fascinated wasn't the right word. Obsessed? The way a child would find one thing and cling on to it for dear life. Whether a stuffed animal or a blanket, if you lose it, you lose that safety you associated with it. Growing up, I kept my love for the place alive and well, extending it beyond just the lights I had known. Never thought it was a place I'd ever actually find myself. Seemed like some distant world far beyond my galaxy, a pipe dream at best. But time marches on and you get older. Start realizing there's less and less holding you back. You give yourself these allowances, things you tell yourself to keep you from going out of your comfort zone. Sometimes, though, there'll be an event that washes over that allowance like battery acid, and suddenly you're left without excuses. Either you do it or you don't. You have to accept that if you miss out on something you wanted your whole life, it's entirely your fault. Battery acid. That's what it tastes like. The feeling of carpet against my fingernails. The scratching sensation rubbed against my cheek. I could have sworn I laid on the floor for a long time. Perhaps it was because, at that moment, I felt like I had lost a life. My safety blanket was ripped away from me. Laying on the white carpet, small patches of red dirtying the purity of the white fibers around my face, I looked towards the ceiling, and as the sun dipped down, it cast a shimmer through the window, one that danced above me. Pale embers played like fire, embers drifting above a sky aflame, just as the memory of the northern lights could have very well been an awakening of my consciousness. Laying there watching another set of lights dance, a lifetime had passed, and I was ready to begin another. Slowly I pulled myself together, sitting up and letting breath into my lungs, cleaning stains off the side of my face that also reminded me of fire. I worked hard. I was focused and methodical. Day after day, things got better, and though it wasn't easy, though it hurt, I was able to move on. Eventually, when I looked at the vacation time I had earned at work, I noticed I had 2 weeks saved up. My time was about to reset when the year rolled over. It was a use it or lose it kind of deal. Sitting at my desk, palm in my hand, I wonder what I would do with such time. Maybe my thoughts would have gotten there organically, but it was the calendar pinned to the wall that ultimately decided. Looking over, I could see above the grid of dates the blues and greens I had known for so long. All my excuses I would have used left when he did. If I didn't take the plunge, it would have been all on me. I had the time, and I had the savings, so I booked it. An adorable cabin and a small vacation community in Alaska. Each day went by so fast waiting for it. I had packed all my things. The house looked like I was preparing to move out. Clothes in boxes, all the food in the fridge was stuff I could quickly pack away and keep cool on the trip. Before I knew it, I was stuffing those boxes into my car and heading out. Saying goodbye to my parents and taking one more look at my apartment seemed so empty without me in it. Even though I would return, it felt like the last time. I couldn't help but stare at the stains on the carpet. Ones that No matter how hard I tried, how long I spent with tears rolling out of my eyes, scrubbing away, they would never come out. They were left behind. It was all a blur. I wanted to drive, as the cabins were one of the few places actually accessible by vehicle. I can't say I remember much of the drive. It was just peaceful, rolling through my head like nothing at all. It wasn't long before I arrived at the cabin. Tires long since clinging to snow, I pulled into a small, designated parking spot. There were a few empty cars already waiting for me, people who had likely arrived a few days before me. When I booked the place, I was lucky to even get it as the other cabins had vacancy. One box after another was unloaded. I saw a kid playing around one of the cabins, maybe around the age I was when I saw that movie. He chased a ball around, kicking it, watching the snow roll off. It was as if no one ever told him how to make a proper snowman. Looking at the cabin, I could see an older woman waving at me as she sipped from a white coffee mug. I offered to smile back, watching my breath drift up. With all my boxes inside, I looked at the cabin next to mine. Another older individual, though he looked it, being about his late 40s, though a life of hard work etched into the stern lines on his face. Somehow, he had fallen asleep in the chair that was on every cabin's porch. I was excited to lay a blanket across my legs and watch the night sky free of light pollution. Food was placed into the refrigerator, and clothing was shoved into drawers. I could already feel myself never wanting to leave. It was almost fate. The small white circular rug that sat ever so quaintly in the living room. I had to take a few deep breaths to calm my nerves, reminding myself it's no different than the white snow outside. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks away to rest and enjoy myself somewhere far from it all. I had gotten to know the people around me over the next few days, told them about my life as they told me about theirs. Turned out I wasn't the only one looking for a new start. The man in his late 40s, Adam saw some action while in the armed forces. His fingers twitched like worms as he told me stories. Kept it real PG for me, but I could see the R ratings in his eyes. Said he came out to the cabin alone. Sounds of the city were too much for him. The older woman and boy? Ellis, the recent widow, trying to find a way to live her life after her husband passed away. He was so much of her that she didn't know who she was by herself, and she figured the cabin was a nice place to discover it. She told me stories in between drags of a cigarette. The boy was Emery, M for short. M's parents weren't ideal, and while Ellis jumped around the subject as M's father was her son, I knew a victim when I saw one. That wasn't my place to push. I didn't see much of the other 3 cabins. A woman around my age was in one of them. Saw her periodically come and go. She looked lonely, but like it was an intentional loneliness. Not unhappy, just in the moment. Never really got her name. Should have approached her, I guess. I know one cabin had a couple in it, not because I ever saw them together, but because their voices would ring out in the middle of the night. Barely near civilization, and they found something to fight about. Seems like they were trying to rekindle a long-since-dead flame. Though I did get a smile on my face whenever I heard Adam's commanding voice rise above the storm, telling them to shut the hell up. Their voices would trickle into nothing so quick. Adam was practically their counselor. The 6th cabin saw her the least. If all of us were out there to try and achieve start over, I think she was out there to let her pass quietly. She was old, barely able to make it out on the porch. She seemed so sweet whenever we caught glances of her, though her fire was a waning one. A lot of us would interact and coexist, and I suddenly found myself wanting to never leave. It wasn't until the 8th day after my arrival that I heard a subtle knocking at my door. I was in the middle of preparing for bed when the sound echoed through my cabin. Walking to the front, I pulled the wooden handle. I was surprised to see Adam standing on my porch. It was fairly late, but without a word, he turned around and gestured to the sky. My heart knew what it was. I had seen glimpses of it, but nothing like this. Walking out onto the porch, I saw them, like translucent worms, gallivanting in the sky. The bright blue and green lights nearly burned into my memories and were hanging perfectly above my head. All 6 of us stood outside looking up as the cabin roofs were a picture frame. Even the older woman with Adam's assistance was able to bear witness to it. She had passed that night. Quiet. Guided by the northern lights above her. Can't even say I knew what happened to her after that. People did come, and suddenly the lights of her cabin stopped turning on. The next 2 days were quiet and somber. I didn't see the others much, just sat inside the cabin sipping tea. It was cozy. I could see clouds rolling in, making a dark sky even more so. Out of the window, I could see specks of white falling from the sky. I was initially happy that I'd be able to witness some snowfall before I had to leave. I sat by the window, watching white drift onto the ground, slowly forming a blanket of white over our little vacation. As the visions of white became dense, I felt my eyes grow tired, and before I knew it, I was waking up a few hours later. When they opened again, I was still coming back to my senses as I watched the same snowfall through a different hue. It took a while to really come to, but when I did, I was surprised to realize it looked like ash was falling outside. Rising from my chair, I walked outside and I stood on the porch, watching the snow falling beyond the porch's roof. Turning my head, I saw Adam also standing on his porch. As we watched the dark snow falling to the floor and tainting the white blanket, I asked him if he'd seen anything like this before. He looked at me and shrugged. Slowly, I walked forward and raised my hand out. I watched a small dot drift down and land on my finger. Pulling my hand back, I held the finger up and looked at the dark snow that had landed there. As I observed it, I could feel a tingling sensation revving up the affected area. The tingling quickly shifted to a burning that sent me back into the house. Rushing over to the sink as the heat continued rising on my finger, I let the warm water fall into my finger for a minute before wiping the area with a washcloth. The color, though, didn't dissipate. It was as if I dragged the finger through an old chimney. Furthermore, it seemed I'd managed to spread the dark shade. The more I looked at it, the more the surface area seemed to be spreading on its own. And the flame that I felt grew to an agonizing cringe. I could see my hand starting to shake due to the pain. The color of my finger suddenly pulsed, and I felt several pinpricks shoot through the affected area. The entire tip of my finger had turned dark, and the color made its way from my first finger joint to the second, creeping towards my knuckle. I saw the finger curl, but I knew distinctly that it had not done so under my command. I tried to uncurl the finger, but it wouldn't budge. It was almost like my nerves had lost the ability to communicate anything other than pain. A pain that grew by the minute. I didn't know what to do or how to stop the creeping dark snow from reaching the rest of my hand. Watching my finger uncurl itself made it feel alien. The feeling was nothing compared to seeing it curl once more in a direction it was never meant to articulate. My finger shuddered as it struggled, curling back for a moment. Then a sharp snap of the bone allowed it to fold in half. My head got light, seeing the blood drip out from where the bone was protruding. A bone that had been stained black. Small beads of red mixed in with inky blotches at the bottom of my sink. The color continued to crawl. I stared at the red drops of blood on the white porcelain sink. For a moment, the pain in my finger echoed the pain I went out there to forget. As the color made it to the second joint of my finger, my nerves hollowed again. The finger looked like a snail's shell when the second joint cracked and bent. The spiraling stick of flesh barely resembled my finger. I only knew that it was mine because of the pain that it brought. Gritting my teeth, I pulled the drawer under the sink open. I placed my hand down so my finger was resting over the edge of the sink. The spiral of flesh started twitching like an animal fresh out of the womb, trying to understand how its limbs worked. I could see the finger getting close to my knuckle, and I knew once it got there, it was going to be much more painful to stop. I rested the larger butcher's knife down just above the knuckle, and with a heavy breath, I pulled it up into the air, and as I exhaled, I brought it back down. The blade slammed into my finger, sending a shock into my body. Nothing compared to how horrified I felt seeing that I hadn't gotten through the bone. The finger was certainly cut. I could see my pale flesh peeking, but within the blood that came out were small, darker bits. These little flakes seemed to move within my blood. They spiked up and reached out of the red like tendrils. Fear filled me, and with more conviction, the butcher's knife was brought down on my finger again. My vision went blurry for a moment, but when the tears drifted from my eyes, I could see the vacancy where my finger had been. Blood was drifting from the wound, and I moved quickly. I had volunteered in a health clinic when I was studying a relevant field in college. The knowledge I barely ever used quickly came back to me in the moment of crisis. Running to the freezer, I grabbed an ice pack. Then, luckily, I found a first aid kit in the bathroom. Applying the ice to the wound felt like hell, but it would slow the bleeding as I dressed the wound with gauze. Standing in the bathroom, I clutched my hand as I watched the gauze shift its shade from the injury. I just kept praying that I wouldn't suddenly see the same ink returning. I pulled the gauze off and I redressed the wound as I exited the bathroom and returned to the kitchen sink. Looking in the bowl, I could see the severed remains of my finger. But my body must have been in shock. It didn't feel real, what I was seeing. My finger was darker than before, having been drained of its blood. Only the ink remained. It was horrifying watching the thing wriggle around. I could hear the fingernail tapping the porcelain. It became quickly apparent that the finger was moving toward me, trying to get to me. It flopped around like a landlocked fish, but it couldn't get high enough to clear the bowl. Stepping to the side, I watched as the thing altered its path to head towards me again. Small, inky tendrils trying to grasp the smooth surface. I backed away from the sink. I didn't want to interact with it in any way. Afraid trying to even reach over it would give it enough room to do something to me. Looking up above the sink was a small window. I could still see the dark snow falling. Some of it had clung to the window. It wasn't moving like the finger, though. It just melted away on the glass. I walked to my front door, staring at a red ball resting in the snow covered by the dark snow. Very little white was left poking out of the ground. My heart pounded as I stepped closer to the door, looking down. I confirmed none of the snow made it onto the porch. Cautiously, I pushed the door open and I stepped out on the porch. The floorboards creaked underneath my steps as I brought myself further out of my house, trying to get a better look. Suddenly remembering that Adam was also on his porch, I shifted my gaze over to his house and felt a dread wash over me. He was standing out in the snow, his chin tilted upward. Dark flakes drifted down and rested against his face. A face that was already littered with so much darkness. I started calling out to him, but my hand lifted and covered my mouth. My survival instincts kicked in, and I was just meant to observe. His body was motionless, so much so I began to wonder if I had simply gone mad, if the pain I had felt in my finger was a fabrication, that I'd simply cut my finger off in hysteria. Adam's mouth opened and the flecks drifted into the maw. More and more of his olive complexion vanished underneath the snow. He looked like a statue. The way the dark shade crafted a stark and solid figure in the snow. With a sudden jerk of his head, I was almost sent to the floor. All his movements were quick and jerky, like something didn't know how to pilot him with any subtlety. It was either all gas or all brakes. His head would twist left and right. Every so often I caught a look of his eyes. They were shifting back and forth so fast I could imagine the headache such a thing would give me. Arm came up from his side and fidgeted the same way. His skin was covered in ash. Nothing left of his original skin tones remained. Just the ash. With a quick jerk, his twitching eyes looked over at me. I remembered how the finger in the sink tried to get at me, and I felt my heart drop. As I started backing up to my doorway, I could see his body beginning to ignore intended articulation, just as my fingers had. It sounded like someone was breaking tree branches right next to my head. Every time I saw an arm pop at the elbow and twist around, I felt my stomach churn. It took a moment for him to start really moving towards me. Like the snow hadn't affected his legs initially. When he did, though, I saw the fabric of his jeans manipulated near the knees. He had gotten a little shorter, too. His knees must have popped like his arms, causing the bones to hang like strings, holding him up. The thing that I once called Adam made one step after another towards me as his whole body jittered. Quick, unnerving movements like a body on fire, fingers twitching like worms, jaw constantly shifted, causing teeth to clack against each other. His head looked like flies were landing on it. Rapid motions, trying to get the intruders to leave him alone. It was like someone had sped up the Thriller dance and set it on loop. There was no bit of Adam left, no agency in his own body. As he approached, and as I retreated, the light from my porch landed on him. The heat from it seemed to call to it. I could see black lines like goopy hair reaching off from the darkness. My hand was on the door handle, ready to retreat inside and barricade myself. I wanted to retreat from the visage of Adam. Those tendrils must have been moving around in his throat. God, I hope that's why he was groaning like that. I hope he died early on. I can't imagine feeling my bones crack and bend like that. As I was pulling the door open, though, I heard a quaint laughter. Innocent and childlike. Looking towards the noise, I saw the red ball lying in the yard. My eyes followed the path. There he was. M just stood in the front door. His silhouette was somehow ominous. I couldn't see Ellis from the doorway. And I could see the gleam on Emery's face. I knew it was about to happen. Time was moving slowly. I'd never experienced that feeling before when adrenaline kicks into overdrive. It's like the world stops spinning just long enough. Despite my verbal attempt to stop the boy, he started leaving the confines of the cabin. All he saw was snow to play in and his ball out in the middle of it. My door was open. I quickly reached inside, feeling the velvet of my jacket. I pulled it loose from the hook. Adam was closer, but not close enough to grab me as I rushed by him. I could see fingers twisted and cracked like bramble, reaching out for me, but failing to connect. Holding the jacket over my head, shielding me as best I could, feet trembling through the snow as I bolted towards M, his small fingers reaching forward. I felt my feet nearly fall from under me as loose snow kicked up. Nearly toppling over, I was able to snatch M up. With the kid in my arms, I quickly entered Ellis's cabin, knowing that Adam would still be coming towards me. I nearly crushed the child falling over. Ellis rounded the corner asking what all the commotion was about. I must have looked insane, asking her to check the child for any spots where the snow had gotten on him. I think she saw the panic I was in. She took M, she started looking over him, asking what it would look like. When I described what I had seen to her, she did a double take. She told me that my face had a dark spot on it. A shiver ran through my body as I bolted to the bathroom to look in the mirror, and sure enough, there was a dark patch of snow on my cheek, one that had grown larger by the moment. Without time to think, I hurried to her kitchen. All the cabins looked the same. I knew exactly where the silverware was. Pulling the drawer open, I got the sharpest-looking knife I could, and I ran into the bathroom with it. Ignoring Ellis's cries for explanation, staring into the mirror, I was repulsed, seeing the spot had already grown larger. Bringing the knife up to my face, I felt that the adrenaline rushing through me before had subsided. A fear of pain caused my hand to shake while looking at the skin I would need to gouge out. I thought of Adam, mindless and wandering, probably stepping up the porch as I stood there, trying to calm myself so that the tip of the knife pressed in right below my cheekbone. I must have been screaming, I don't remember. The pain of dragging the tip of the knife across my face, pressing deep into the skin, was blinding. I traced the outline of the dark spot and I pressed in deep to make sure I got it all. So deep I occasionally felt the tip of the knife prod the side of my tongue. In the way that adrenaline seems to slow down time, the pain made it feel like I was in the bathroom for hours, tears rolling down my cheek. The only reason I knew about them was feeling the salt content hitting the ever-increasing wound. One drag after another trying to beat the clock, I pulled the knife in and out of my cheek. The worst was angling the knife to try and slice under the tissue to separate the muscle tissue. There was a constant ringing in my ears and a heat behind my eyes. Alice's sink resembled a crime scene by the time I was done. I could feel my body starting to get light as the slab of my flesh dropped into the sink. By the time it hit the sink, you would have mistaken it for a lump of charcoal. That is until it started to slither around the bowl. The weird oblong shape moving across the skin like a centipede, carried by hundreds of dark, short limbs. Quickly reaching for the first aid kit behind the mirror, I started retreating from the bathroom. I had figured that the things were coming toward me because of the heat I was giving off, so before I exited the bathroom, I popped the window open. I hoped it would be enough to slow the things down to confuse it. Popping the kit open, I dropped to my knees. My body felt so heavy, I was too weak to fight it. Fingers failed time and time again to get a good grasp of the medical supplies. My vision started to wane and I fell forward. My face fell to the carpet where I laid, feeling tired and empty. The blood from the open wound on my face starting to stain the carpet around me. I could see hues of crimson eating away at the pure white. The sounds of the front door grew louder and louder, and I thought maybe I would just lay there, telling myself that I had fought pretty hard. As my vision started to fail, the cabin looked so much like home. Moving my body with labored effort, I could see the cabin's front door as Adam's body slammed against it. The wood shook and seemed to send out a pulse that caused the world to wobble around. I swear I could see him leaving. I could see him walking out of the apartment of my life like it was just another day. Leaving me all alone on the floor, pushing my fingers forward. Through the forest of carpet fibers, I could see Alice walking to the front door. Weak breath couldn't reach her, telling her to get away. Useless. That door was going to come down any moment. Any one of those impacts would be enough. Reaching further, my fingers landed on a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Why did it have to be rubbing alcohol? The bottle of clear disinfectant in my hand. I rolled my body. I couldn't just lay on the carpet forever. I couldn't stay the person I was. I knew I had to get back up. Twisting the cap of the bottle off, the small white piece of plastic slapped against my face. I tipped the bottle slowly, took a deep breath, and let the liquid pour down onto my face. The alcohol drenched the patch of my face that was devoid of skin. I swear for a moment I heard circus music. Like I was taken somewhere else. The burning. A circus on fire. My back arched, toes curled, and I let out a howl that I'm still not convinced was my own. An animal. I was an animal. I could see Ellis turning to me, shock on her face as my body trembled from the pain. Such piercing fire rummaging my body. Bunched fingers pounded the floorboards. I used the shrill of energy to pull myself up to my feet. I was running on empty fumes, small sparks that I gathered. She rushed over, my hand clutching the gauze and cotton. She quickly started dressing the wound as I was barely able to get my arms up. I heard her voice muffled, telling Em to get me some water. All the while, the banging at the door continued. Then, the windows. I could see their faces pressed against the glass. The couple. The girl. They were all outside, banging on windows, smashing away at the wooden cabin. If I had the mental energy to spare, I would have felt helpless. Instead, I asked Em if she had any more alcohol. She nodded, telling me I shouldn't be drinking it, though. Shaking my head, I pointed towards the lighter on her countertop, the one next to a half-empty pack of cigarettes. She gave me a bottle of vodka. I worked quickly, shoving fabric into the opening, making sure I got it deep enough to touch the drink. starting to feel the heaviness fade as my body desperately fought to heal. Telling the two to go hide, I stumbled over the front door. With my fingers on the handle, I could feel the thing slam against the door. My fingers rattled as I tried to keep my grip. I waited for it to slam once more. When it did, I swung the door open, using the momentum the thing had gotten from bouncing against the door. I shot my foot forward. It was weak, but enough to send Adam tumbling backwards. His body was... It was... nothing like before. It was as if his frame was melting. His limbs were almost unrecognizable. Bones had cracked, and arms and legs no longer had structure. The thing was a mass of black wires, tugging and ripping skin soaked in oil. It fell backwards like a drunk, flailing noodle limbs and rolling its head around, no vertebrae to speak of. The kick, however, also sent me to the floor. I kept a tight grip on the bottle and the lighter, though, and so I placed a flame under the fabric, watched it light. A few breaths to steel myself as I let the bottle fly. It went just far enough, smashing against the wooden porch across from me. My cabin. The fire started immediately, the alcohol overcoming the rag on impact. Using my foot, I quickly kicked the door shut and I backed away. Ellis and Em ran over to me as my head got light. I laid back, imagining all my stuff in the cabin going up in flames. Ellis told me the things stopped hitting the house. They were drawn to the burning cabin. It worked, but I knew. I knew eventually that cabin was going to burn out. The thought horrified me, but I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. I guess I just drifted off. It was a pounding at the door that woke me. I don't know how long I was out, but I felt fear spike within me, shredding my lungs. The banging got louder and louder. I told Ellis to get me a knife, but as she started to move, the door finally gave way and sprung open. I immediately saw the dark person standing in the doorway, but it was just a person. Someone in a dark padded suit. They looked ready to try and stifle a riot, their face hidden behind a dark mask, not one bit of their skin exposed. He was talking on the radio, telling someone that he found 3 more. He was holding onto what I recognized as a flamethrower, a massive silver propane tank, lit flame ready to release any more. Even more so, I could see the light behind them, streams of fire reaching out and torching the snow-infected creatures. 2 people rushed in behind the one reporting. They were wearing thinner armor, resembled hazmat suits as opposed to the battle-ready gear. They barely talked to us, instead looking us over, presumably for dark spots. One of them took a good hard look at my wounds before applying more care than I had. And then they escorted us out, driving a van right up to the porch where we were able to climb inside without being exposed to the snow. I watched the town get smaller behind us as the black snow started becoming less and less prevalent the farther out that we went. Eventually, there wasn't a trace of it left. The ride was quiet other than M's occasional questions or crying. Me and Ellis exchanged one last glance as we were led in different directions. I don't know what happened to them after that. Hopefully they're safe like me. I was questioned. They asked me what I'd seen, how I was feeling. I told them everything. I felt like I was still alive. It's all that mattered. I don't even know much about what happened or who came to save us. They explained it was some abnormal parasite that was pulled into the clouds during evaporation. And I felt like a lie, though. A cute, simple answer. Any questions I had pressing the matter were stonewalled. A lot of their words amounted to, "You're lucky you're allowed to leave." I did see they had patches on them, ones that said AECB. But I don't know anything more than that. I haven't been able to find anything online about them. There's something odd about things today. They just let me go. There are a million more bizarre stories out there. No one's just gonna start believing all of them. You don't need to shut people up when they sound like they're out of their minds, I guess, but I have more clarity now than I ever have. My apartment's empty now. I've got a new place. Somewhere cold. Somewhere I can watch the snow fall. Somewhere I can truly rebuild. And find out who I really am. On the 7th day of July in 1947, the Walker Air Force Base, or Roswell Army Airfield, recovered what appeared to be, in their words, a flying saucer, or flying disc, from a ranch in Chavez County, New Mexico. The rancher in question, a William Mack Brazel, found a cluster of, as the report states, quote, rubber strips, tinfoil, a rather tough paper, sticks, and tape, end quote. The materials were confiscated and brought to the military base. The following day, July 8th, a press release was issued stating the materials were that of a flying disc. However, this report was quickly retracted, exchanged for a favorable evidence of a crashed weather balloon. The reasoning for this change is unknown. However, theories attempt to fill in the blanks. One speculation suggests that the report of such a discovery would lead to mass hysteria, akin to the Orson Welles broadcast of the late 30s. Even so, this claim has never been addressed by officials publicly. Despite Mac Brazel's conflicting words, his side of the story was quickly dropped, and the weather balloon explanation was hailed as the case-closed resolution to what occurred on July 7th. Resurfacing in the late 70s, and again in 1994, the story of Roswell was altered with claims of UFOs and an alternative hypothesis to the weather balloon, that being a nuclear surveillance balloon from Project Mogul, an operation helmed by the US Air Force to detect Soviet atomic blasts. Furthermore, any eyewitness reports of alien bodies being retrieved from the nearby area were chalked up as Air Force test dummies, and the story was dropped again. Being left up to the imaginations of conspiracy theorists and ufologists alike, the Roswell incident has become somewhat of a joke over the last 30 or so years, sparking pop culture depictions of aliens and UFOs, often tongue-in-cheek in nature and treating those who believe the claims to be about as sane as flat earthers. There is, however, another notion that's been floating around for the past 50 or so years. This one is far more complicated, but nevertheless more competent, known as the Roswell Thesis. The premise starts as follows: a common ground between deniers and so-called truthers alike. The object retrieved on July 7, 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico was a balloon. Whether from Project Mogul or a mere weather balloon is irrelevant. The reported bodies were merely dummies, and the entire thing was not a crashed UFO cover-up. It is from here where the theory takes a sharp turn from the norm, as according to the thesis, the claims from Roswell, and likely those from other UFO incidents from around the globe, are merely fabrications made by extraterrestrials. Consider it for a moment. Would these advanced, otherworldly entities from the outer regions of space blunder in such a way, enact such an oversight that would cause their voyeurism to go blatantly noticed by the residents of our planet? Does the low-flying and obvious nature of reported UFOs seem utterly convenient? Does a spacecraft made of paper, tinfoil, and tape seem archaic? Do the sightings of little green men, or crop circles, strike you as glaring oxymorons to the alleged cryptic nature of these alien beings? The thesis is, in essence, a conspiracy of conspiracies. The idea is that yes, the Roswell incident as well as other alleged alien sightings are hoaxes. However, the threat of extraterrestrial beings is still imminent. In fact, The theory suggests we're already too late to act against their invasion. There is a preconceived notion as to what an alien invasion looks like, whether from mentally ill truthers or science fiction films and literature. However, the truth is often a depiction from fictitious propaganda, and yet, at the same time, the truth is hidden within these myths. On the night of September 19, 1961, at approximately 10:30 p.m., Barney and Betty Hill, residents of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, claimed to have been abducted by extraterrestrials while driving home from vacation. The couple reported seeing a UFO hovering over their vehicle and immediately began speeding home, where they reported feelings of impulse and odd sensations, including vivid dreams of gray-skinned creatures and metallic discs. The vehicle they sped home in had noticeable circles etched in a metallic substance along the trunk. Moving a compass near the symbols made the needle go berserk. Betty Hill also noted a pinkish powder-like substance stained on her dress. Later, under hypnosis, Betty would describe a hologram shown to her of the extraterrestrials' homeworld, the binary star system known as Zeta Reticuli. According to a journalist, Cortland Dixon Barnes Bryan, 73% of an alleged alien sighting refer to these Zeta Reticulans, also known as the Greys. While these accounts have bits of truth sprinkled throughout, the theory suggests most of the abductions was carried out to seem fictitious, as if purposeful. What we're dealing with are not simple-minded primitives, as humans assume, being ourselves somewhat primitive, despite our countless advancements. No, these entities are vastly more intelligent than us, realizing that the best way to invade is not by sheer force, ray guns, or War of the Worlds style walkers, but rather forcing our species into extinction through self-genocide. The first notions of this idea come from 1966, the autopsy of a 44-year-old Conrad Dennison, a patient of the then-named New Mexico Hospital for the Insane. Today, this facility is known as the New Mexico Behavioral Health Institution, located in the town of Las Vegas, New Mexico, not to be confused with a city in Nevada of the same name. Dennison has been rather, unfortunately, scrubbed from the records of the institution, as no mention of his name or symptoms is available in any form or document. His case, however, remains one of the cornerstones for this thesis. Admitted to the hospital in 1965 as a schizophrenic, Dennison claimed to have been abducted by extraterrestrials. Reporting consistent migraines and nightmares, Dennison was transferred to psychiatrist Eric Ralston, who had a background in lobotomy. He claimed that Dennison had a cyst in his frontal lobe, requiring surgery to remove it. After repeated sessions in which Dennison claimed to have seen pale, human-looking beings, he admitted to having killed his 42-year-old wife, Charlene Dennison. When asked where her body was located, Dennison claimed he didn't know because, quote, "they were controlling me while I was asleep," end quote. Despite a confession to murder, the implications of insanity meant a lengthy trial, one that Dennison would never see, as months later, in November of 1966, Conrad Dennison died due to complications with his lobotomy. During the operation, Ralston made note of a small, organic glob attached to the frontal lobe. This glob, while organic, was unlike anything the hospital had seen. Undetected by X-rays, the cyst-like glob had been surgically attached to Dennison's brain, although the surgery that presumably attached it was theorized to be quite advanced, considering methods used in the 21st century are not capable of replicating the seamless precision of the transplant. Any further information regarding Conrad Dennison is unknown, as the files on his case were mysteriously removed from existence. Even stranger, perhaps, is that Conrad and Charlene's son, Kenny Dennison, conceived 1 year before Charlene's murder and 1 year after the alleged abduction, was arrested in 1982 for robbing a convenience store. When approached by responding officers, Dennison drew a firearm and was killed on sight. During the autopsy, pathologists noted the same cyst-like glob on Kenny Dennison's frontal lobe, as if, somehow, the implant was genetically passed down from Conrad to his son. Kenny's adoptive parents and name have been obscured for privacy reasons, but rumor has it the family was not violent, and Kenny's behavior was quite unlike him. Violent crime rates have steadily increased over the past 50 years. While not genocide by a long shot, these outbursts are, perhaps, birthing pains from something to come, not driven by rage, malice, or envy, but mental illness. Illness that, in estimations, has been passed down by generations. Illness that has infected the mind. In more recent turn of events, following an automobile accident in Springdale, Utah on April 19th of 2013, a 22-year-old college student, Sean Phillips, was arrested for violently stabbing the driver of the other vehicle, a 77-year-old Nathan Motif. Despite having no record of violence, Phillips was later found to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder at the Highland Ridge Psychiatric Treatment Center. 3 weeks before the stabbing, Phillips' mother claimed he went missing for a period of 2 days, during which Phillips had lost cell signal. Upon his return home, Phillips couldn't recall where he had been, but noted occasional headaches and periodic outbursts of screaming. In an interview with Phillips' roommate at Highland Ridge, Phillips' erratic behavior was described as inhuman and weird. During one conversation, Phillips confided in his roommate, claiming the thin gray people were in his head. Moments later, Phillips' roommate described Phillips' eyes as going dead before he lashed out at a fellow patient. Phillips would receive 13 therapy sessions before passing away in his room on December 23rd of 2013. As reported by his roommates, Phillips' final words were, "Tell Mom I'm sorry. I didn't hurt that man. They made me do it." Phillips proceeded to suffocate himself with a pillow. These acts of self-harm are genuine. However, the instances and crimes that led to such atrocities are not self-inflicted. Even more troublesome are the cases in which the offender is subdued and harmed, many times killed by others, as this, fearfully, was the motive of the beings all along. Over the last decade, UFO sightings have decreased. While public interest in alien life has always remained stimulated, the shift from humanoid greys to bacterial water-based life on Mars has occurred, resulting in the intelligent Roswell-type alien beings largely classified as fiction. Some theorize that the reasoning for this change is a part of a larger plan. As in the minds of some theorists, the extraterrestrials at hand want nothing more than for their existence to be disregarded. Roswell was their idea. The UFOs may be theirs, but only toys, perhaps, so that their true nature might be tucked away. They're watching us all, for some, in our heads, and they want us to buy into their lie that they don't exist. It appears that even we, too, have been infiltrated, as the only way to discredit this theory is to treat it as ludicrous fiction, invalidating the truth and parading its nonsense. You may be reading this thesis in a fiction-based catalog. Please consider what you're reading is not fiction. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and it is currently September, which means that we're getting dangerously close to Halloween. For those of you guys who are following me here on YouTube, thank you so much for watching as we get closer and closer to the Halloween countdown, and thank you so much for hitting that subscribe button and the bell so that you don't miss out on the Halloween countdown. And for those of you who are listening on Spotify or anywhere that the podcast is listed, hey, thank you for subscribing to me there. If you're in some of those colder areas, you're probably getting hit by the fall, which means it's gonna start getting chilly. You know what's great for when it's getting chilly? A nice hot cup of tea. And my wife happens to sell hot cups of tea. Loose leaf tea. You can supply the hot water. Etsy.com/shop/ivory monocle tea has all different kinds of loose leaf tea available for you guys to try out, including a MrCreepyPasta tea. And like always, I want to give a very big special thank you to everybody who supports me out on Patreon, patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. You guys, as always, are the real MVPs. And I'm talking about you specifically, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Brian Ace, Bobby Karman, Stephanie Butler, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Reaper61167, Alex the Sandwich, Darth Miver, Micah Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Ness69420, aisodoehtraed, Nessie, BardoHawk764, Ferb, Harley, Madam Skullbunny, Sashi Sazaku, at grizzly_olsen.pro, Hayden the Spooky Boy, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Ashwood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Miss Exandra, Mr. Unsettling Spaghetti, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Fried Chicken 12, James Bruce, Freddy Krueger, Ty Nanny, Michael Scarborough, Infernal One, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Nels, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiwi the Sloth, Tommy Green, Festra Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nina Smith, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Paulson, Trace Miles, and Corey Kenshin. You guys and everyone on this list of names that I can't pronounce, and everybody in the description down below, and everyone who supports me on Patreon who doesn't get those things but also supports, I love all of you. Thank you guys so much. Stick with me, cause Halloween's a-comin', and sweet dreams.